Welcome, 80/20 baseball community. Welcome, youth coaches. Let's dive into this week's episode and elevate our coaching game. This episode is coming off the heels of a two-part interview with Coach Sarancic. Quick comment about the interview with Coach Sarancic. He shared out a lot of tips. He shared out a lot of information. I thought it was really, really good stuff all around. Here's a tip about all the tips he shared. I recommend picking one or two of the things that he shared and then going and putting those in, looking to use one or two things to start and then go from there. Take one or two of those and go look to use those in your next practice, or more specifically, in between innings at your next game. Today, we got a quick hitting episode. It's going to be a quick one, but it's going to have a lot of good stuff in it. We're going to talk long toss, and then we're going to talk about working the process versus trusting the process. Real quick, before we dive into the long toss discussion, a few days ago, I was out at an 11U practice helping out. I am the coaching director for a local competitive branch of the Little League. And so as the coaching director, I try to make it out to practices, give my input, share my thoughts, and I'm giving back to the local Little League, the kids in my neighborhood playing this Little League. Well, anyways, I was out there this past week and was watching an intra-squad scrimmage and came up with a great additional strategy that I'm putting in the coaching plan. There's the scrimmage guide in the 80/20 baseball coaching plan. I'm telling you, if you use this scrimmage guide that's in the coaching plan, your scrimmages will be second to none, guaranteed. I have never seen a scrimmage run with the procedures and the elements that are outlined in the 80/20 baseball scrimmage guide that comes with the coaching plan. In fact, all the coaches that have bought the 80/20 baseball coaching plan got that tip emailed directly to them. And you can have access to that coaching plan in minutes from now. 8020baseball.com, right there at the top of the home page. I also implemented, when I was out of practice, a long toss throwing routine with this team. And long toss is something that is discussed a lot in the baseball world. Long toss, like everything in society, has gone through its cycles, its ups and downs in terms of popularity. Years ago, long toss was king. And then there was about a 10 or 15 year run where there was a stigma around long toss. In fact, most professional teams, a lot of college teams, started cutting off their long toss distance. They wouldn't let players go out past a relatively short distance compared to what they could throw to. And as of recent, long toss has made its comeback on the 8020baseball.com website. There's tons of stuff, like I said, the coaching plan, but there's also an article called Long Toss Pros and Cons. I want to dive into it real quick, add a little extra to it. This will give you clarity about long toss, the pros and the cons. And what I've seen in the baseball world, what I've heard in the baseball community, the coaching community, I've heard a lot of coaches that are all in and they think long toss is the magic elixir for arm health, the silver bullet for arm strength improvement. And then I've heard many coaches, and like I discussed just a second ago, there were many teams and programs that ditched long toss. They were down on it. They didn't like it. They didn't really want any of their players doing it for a while. And like we always do on this coaching podcast, the 80/20 baseball podcast, we try to look at both sides, the pros and the cons, the trade-offs, the benefits, the downsides. So here we go. Long toss, pros and cons. I'm going to come right out and say it. Long toss can definitely be a valuable part of a comprehensive throwing program. Long toss can be a useful component of a reliable arm strengthening program. However, here at 80/20 baseball, we do not believe it's the magic elixir, like I mentioned earlier, for arm health or that silver bullet for arm strength improvement. Now, for those of you that are really new to baseball, long tossing is baseball lingo for a throwing routine that includes long distance throws. Most of you know that, but figured I'd just throw that in just to make sure we're clear. Long toss is typically the part of a throwing routine, a throwing progression, a throwing program that really extends out the throws to a maximum distance. I think of it like this. The long toss part of a throwing routine are the throws that happen from the point in which the players are making essentially the longest throw they'll make in the game. Think of a shortstop from the 5-6 hole throwing to first. Think of an outfielder throwing home. So essentially those long throws in the game and then some out to a distance where the players are maxed out. Traditionally, there have been two schools of thought regarding long toss. One group's put it on a pedestal, and unfortunately, they've talked about it like it was the only ingredient in the magic sauce for a lot of players. And then another group of coaches, like I said, backed away and avoided long toss in their throwing routine. I'm a pitching coach by trade, and there were years where I backed off the throwing routine, did different distances. But where we're at now, we're in the middle in terms of how much importance and how much weight we put into long toss. In other words, we like it, we do it, we definitely think it should be part of a throwing routine, a throwing program, but it's one part of a comprehensive throwing routine, an arm strengthening routine. In 2003, I got drafted out of college. I fly out to North Carolina. I join up with my team, go out to the field to run through a throwing routine, throwing program. Nobody mentioned to me that there was a hard cap on the distance. So I got out to 140, 150 feet, which isn't far at all for a professional baseball player. And the pitching coach, who's actually a major league pitching coach and a well-known major league pitching coach now, I could hear him yelling at me from across the field. And he's yelling, "We don't go past 120 here." Well, they didn't share this information with me before I went out there. And at first I was puzzled, but I just went along with what he said. I moved back into 120 feet, and we never went further than that for the rest of the summer, through the rest of the season. The organization had put a tight restriction on the maximum long toss distance. I had just come from Long Beach State, 4 years at Long Beach State, one of the most respected baseball programs in the country, well known for their pitching development. We had structured throwing programs, absolutely, very structured, but there was no hard cap ever. So this was a shock. Well, I came to find out that this was something that was happening all around professional baseball, college, and even high school baseball, capping long toss. I highly recommend not capping your long toss for your players. I highly recommend letting your players, when the time is right, when their arm strength is right, when they're rested, to go out and long toss as far as their arm will let them. Here are the pros behind long toss. First and foremost, if a player is going to make an accurate throw at a maximum distance, the player must move optimally. It forces the optimization of the throw, the delivery, the mechanics, the kinetic chain. When a player is throwing a ball to a maximum distance, there's no room for faulty or wasted movements. Successful long toss requires quality movement from start to finish. To throw accurately and powerfully at a long distance, there is no room for error and no room for a lack of intensity, momentum, etc. That's a huge benefit of long toss. It's instant feedback. Was that throwing motion optimized or not? It has to be optimized for a player to get to that maximum throwing distance. When you're throwing it at a maximum distance, players, after a while at least, can very clearly feel if they had an efficient, smooth, effective throwing motion, throwing delivery. It forces the player to move optimally if they want to get that ball out there consistently. Another benefit of long toss is the obvious feedback it provides the thrower and the coach. The distance magnifies errors. When throwing at a maximum range, the poor throws, those bad throws, will be much easier to see because they will miss the target by yards, not inches and feet. If a set of throwing partners is spaced out 90 feet and their throws are coming in 2 feet off center, those same throws will be 5 to 10 feet off center when traveling, say, 200 feet. A poor throw at 90 feet doesn't look too bad, but the same shoddy throw at 200 plus feet, 150 plus feet or further will significantly miss the mark. This feedback can be very eye-opening and very useful. It can also quickly motivate players to find a better way to produce a more athletic, higher quality, more accurate throw. Now, along with optimizing that throwing motion and delivery, it requires players, that is long toss, to optimize momentum, body positioning, the timing of the kinetic chain, the kinematic sequencing. Now, to optimize these links, these movements, in order to generate a powerful, accurate, maximum distance throw, players must be very efficient through all the parts of the throwing motion and the delivery. If any of the parts of the throw are lacking in efficiency, quality, effectiveness, a quality throw cannot be completed. A successful long toss routine requires quality athletic movements. And for just those two reasons right there, I think long toss is very valuable. Gives great feedback. It can make a okay throw that's made up close look like a terrible throw once that distance is extended. It really magnifies the errors. It's very truthful and eye-opening to players. And it also forces the players to optimize their throwing motion. And if they rep that enough, that should translate and transfer into the game. Now, the drawbacks of long toss. Long toss should not be put up on a pedestal. It by itself will not produce incredible arm strength and pitching statistics. First off, long toss does not replicate the throwing angle of throws made during the game. The caveat to that would be every once in a while, an outfielder will throw a ball with a little bit of an arc to it. Although, if they do that, they're not going to hit their cutoff man like they should. So even those throws are questionable. The maximum distance throws require a release angle much higher than that of almost all game throws. A coach and a player must always be cautious about using different training methods that don't carry directly over to the game. Long toss has an upward trajectory as the ball is released. That is an upward angle. It has to get to that maximum distance. Now, if they're trying to throw it at max velocity, that doesn't need to be thrown at an upward angle, but we're talking about long toss here. In a game, very few, almost no throws are made with an upward trajectory throwing angle. That is unless you want your infielders to sail the ball into the stands or your outfielders to routinely miss the cutoff man. Now, maximum distance throws do utilize a higher throwing angle, but those movement patterns can be offset a bit by including a phase of shorter throws following the max distance phase. In the 80-20 baseball throwing program, throwing routine, that's built in on the back end. These shorter game distance throws can help recalibrate the timing and the movement patterns. So those long distance throws with the upward angle can be offset somewhat by following it up with more game-like release angles, throwing angles. Another downside is when players like to use maximum distance throwing before games. I'm not a big fan of that. I think you should save your bullets for the game. Again, there are some situations where this might work, but it's highly recommended to not use long toss in a pregame routine. That doesn't mean you can't extend out the throws and build out some length on those throws, sure, but it shouldn't be a structured long toss routine. It shouldn't be the same long toss program, long toss routine that you're using during practice. So, in sum, long tossing is part of a proper arm strengthening program, but players should be using other modalities too to build up their arm strength and arm endurance. For pitchers, the first thing to go almost always on the pitching mound when it comes to muscle fatigue, it's not the shoulder, it's not the biceps, the triceps, the forearms, it's not the latissimus dorsi, the lats, it's the legs. The legs almost always go first on a pitcher, and if the legs go, we got no foundation, and that's not a good place to be. So you want to have a stronger arm, a healthier arm, get those legs stronger, build up the muscle endurance in those legs, build up the stability, the balance in those legs, the mobility in those legs, flexibility. There are other things that should be used, light weights, some lightweight strengthening of the shoulders as part of a strength and conditioning routine. So yes, long toss has a place in the training routine and should be structured into a comprehensive throwing program, but there are limitations. It should just be one part of that well-rounded arm strengthening program, but it should definitely be a part of the throwing routine, the throwing progression, the throwing program. Absolutely. It needs to be there. No doubt about it. For any players that arms are not injured, they should be doing long toss insofar as they're not expected to say maybe pitch the next day or that day. Long tossing has a very valuable role, but there are some trade-offs. And we talked about one way to offset some of those trade-offs with the high throwing trajectory, arm angle, and release point. But those are the pros and cons. I'd love to hear your feedback on long toss. Email me, coachbo@8020baseball.com. I would love to hear from all of you. All right, let's finish with this really good, concise topic. I often hear in the sports world, in the coaching world, the message, quote, trust the process. Hey, we need to trust the process. Hey, you got to trust the process. Hey, it's all about trusting the process. I propose we shelve that message and we don't use it. I know some of you are like, Coach Bo, that's crazy. I've been hearing those three words, trust the process. I've been hearing those three words my whole life. I played for some great coaches. They said it all the time. I hear you. I understand. I do. But we're not trying to copy. We're trying to optimize, and we're trying to build upon the shoulders of all the great coaches that came before us. We're trying to build upon that, not just be carbon copies. We can use what they learned and then add to it, right? That's how the world works. That's how society works. That's how almost everything works. There's nothing different here in the coaching world. And I propose we use the message, quote, work the process rather than trust the process. I think this is much better messaging. It's very subtle, but I highly recommend you shelve the message, trust the process, and replace it with work the process. Let's work the process. Hey, work the process, work the process. Telling our players to work the process, in my opinion, is better than telling them to trust the process. It's a subtle change in words, but a big change in messaging. We all know that having a process and a routine is super important. It is vital. But if the results are not there after a while, we can't keep on trusting what we're doing. We can't keep trusting that process that continually gets us these subpar results. We need to iterate. So this came about by just questioning, is this the best way to spread a positive message, a productive message about buying into a process, about using a process? There's no arguing. I don't think anybody would argue that having a process and a routine is not vital, is not key, is not super important. But when we're telling our players to trust the process, think about that from a 12-year-old. Think about that from a 14-year-old. They think trust the process. I got to trust it. But we never want to trust our process because we're constantly trying to test our process and iterate and improve upon it. If we trusted it, we would never want to change it. We just trust it. And I get where they're coming from. And I think the message, trust the process, is coming from the right place. But I think it lacks clarity with how we should handle our processes, our processes. I like work the process because that tells us to get out there and work the process. That tells our players to get out there and work it, stay on track, follow the process, follow the routine. But we take the word trust out. So we say, hey, work the process. Let's work it for a couple weeks. Let's work it for a month. Let's work it for this season and see where we're at. Let's work the process and iterate as we need to. So I propose that subtle change in messaging. Let's work the process, guys. Hey, boys, let's work the process. Hey, players. Hey, team. Let's work the process. We're going to work our hitting plan process. We're going to work our throwing routine process. We're going to work our strength and agility process. We're going to work our rundown defense process. Let's work that process. Let's work it. And as we go along, as we get a good sample size, we can then look to iterate, improve, and further optimize it. So I propose we use this messaging. Let's work the process versus trust the process. It's a little thing, but I think it makes a big difference in messaging to our players. Next week, I have two specific coaching gear tips that I'm a huge fan of, that I almost always go to the field with. One of these I always go to the field with. The other one, almost always, whenever I can. And I'll explain when there are certain situations you can't use this coaching gear. Like in a game environment, you might not be able to use this coaching gear. I'm going to share with you two specific coaching gear tips next week. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about this message that I think is fascinating, and it'll help speed us up, become better coaches faster, and also in our day jobs. It's going to make us better at our day jobs. We're going to talk about the speed of iteration, This stuff's fascinating. I'll talk about this. It's a mindset, and I'm going to give a couple examples of how we can specifically speed up our iteration process as coaches so our teams get better faster, we get better faster, because hey, the seasons go quick, the years go fast. Before you know it, your 3 years of coaching, your 5 years of coaching, your 7 years of coaching will be over, and that's that. So why not increase the speed of iteration? We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. All right. So if you're enjoying these podcast episodes, I'd love for you to follow me across the social media platforms, X, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. Drop a like, comment, share that. I know the website, 8020baseball.com, and all the stuff over there, including the coaching plan and this podcast, are the main channels, but I'm trying to build up and utilize the X platform, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, all that more and more. Your support means a lot, and it helps keep the content coming. All right, that's going to wrap up this episode. I look forward to being back here next week for our weekly get-together, coming out with a new episode every Tuesday. You've already made a great decision to be a coach, but if you're going to be a coach, why not be a great coach? And you can all be a great coach by following what we talk about here on the podcast, all the stuff over at 8020baseball.com. We got this. Until next week, let's keep taking care of our health so we can be at our best for our families, our close friends, for our players, our teams. Let's take this information out to the field, put it into play. Y'all take care. Until next week, adios.